Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Miss Samantha Harte. And Samantha, who the heck are you and what are you doing here today?
It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am not one thing, but many. That is a complicated question these days. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a podcast host. I am an author with a really special book coming out on June 10th. We'll get into that. I am an aspiring speaker, though I speak already,
Hmm.
but I have big, big aspirations. And I'm a sober mom of two as a way to get started in this conversation.
Awesome. Well, Samantha and I met actually at an event a few weeks ago, or 1 week ago, well, not even that long ago. And her and I were just chopping it up, having a convo, and I thought, wow, she knows her stuff. I want to bring her on here because her knowledge might be relevant to you listening here. So, Samantha, you're about to release your book. You have your story that you've kind of gone through to become who you are today. The one thing that I think is really cool about your story, and I'm not going to spoil it or anything like that, I'll let you go into it, but is your journey from the lowest of lows to now kicking ass in your business, in your personal branding, in your life, right? So I think that story of hope is fantastic for a lot of people that are at their lowest of lows and have nothing to lose, but they don't know how far they can go up yet. And I think that's one that I think your story really hits on. So let's hear it. What's your story?
Hmm. Yeah, that is definitely my story. There's been so many quote unquote low points. And one low point that you would think would be utter rock bottom was the day that I got accepted into graduate school. I knew I was going to be a part of this doctoral program, super prestigious. I really in my heart wanted to be other things since I was little, dancing, singing, lighting up stages, something in entertainment. And that dream kind of went away to die somewhere for a while because it wasn't what my mother thought was best for me. And in my house, my mother's word ruled. So I was a good little soldier. I was great in school, got accepted into this doctoral program. And the way that I celebrated was, well, when you work hard, you play hard. So I called the only other girl I knew who drank and used drugs like I did because I came from a family where that was highly normalized. And I was really good at a lot of things. So surely I could control that too. And we spent an entire day doing cocaine all over the streets of New York City during Christmas time, stopping in and out of bars to drink a Corona and do more cocaine on the bathroom stall. By the evening, I felt really off and later found out as I woke up for some reason that I can't explain on the floor that I had a seizure. So I had overdosed. And that was in around 2007. That is not my bottom. That is not the lowest point. And it would take me another almost 2 years to really have enough shame and enough fear of feeling like maybe I don't have control over this thing before I went to meetings with the only person that I knew who was sober at the time, the only person I trusted. And like so many of us, the meetings were not for me, not for this girl, not for this high functioning addict, not for a girl who came from a house where there was no such thing as God. And if you believed in God, you were a fool with a low IQ, and the only person you can rely on is yourself. So, because I trusted the person who brought me into the meetings, and I believed that somehow he got and stayed sober and seemed happy, I hung around him. But the steps and the God thing, not for me, And so I'm in grad school and I'm kind of getting my life together ish, if you want to call it that. Externally, things were looking brighter. Internally, I was suffering because if you're using drugs and alcohol, you're anesthetizing pain. And if you stop anesthetizing it and you don't replace it with healthy coping mechanisms, you can go mad. And at the end of my first year sober, that man who was a friend before he was a sponsor had relapsed. And I was so stunned by that. He was 22 years sober from heroin. And it was really unfathomable to me at that point. I did not understand the monster that addiction was. And so I remember I had gone to California for just a bit at the end of grad school, came back to New York, met up with him, just wanted to look in his eyes and understand what happened. And he couldn't give me a straight answer. It was as if somebody went behind his eyes and blew the light out. And not the first time and not the last time that I would be in the presence of what I consider a ghost. So a person whose body is alive, but whose spirit is dead. And then 2 weeks later, I got a call that he killed himself. The reason I talk about this is because this is one of those cornerstones in my recovery, not when I hit bottom. Okay. And I'm talking about emotional rock bottom, but a moment where I knew that if I touched drugs or alcohol again, I was dead. Clear as day. And if I worked the steps as they were outlined in those meetings, it felt like a threat to my life too, because it threatened everything I had learned as a child that kept me safe. So the next 5 years of my life looked like I was highly productive on the outside. But with matters of the heart, like my marriage, because I stayed with the guy that I was using with, he didn't have an addiction problem. When he was ready to put it down, he put it down. And I kept going. And in my using days, I was a liar and a cheater and getting what I thought was rightfully mine. And so there was a lot of resentment. There was baggage between us that we really needed to heal. But we trudged forward. We were young, we were a little bit stupid and reckless. We really loved each other. But here we are in this early phase of our marriage. I'm not really well, spiritually speaking. So my default is I'm going to control the world around me so that I feel safe. And if I can go further, I'm going to control you too. How you think of me, how you feel about me. And as he pulled away emotionally, physically in the marriage, I unraveled. And I ended up sleeping on many friends' couches because the fighting between us was so bad, not physical, but it was daily and constant. And I was in a fit of rage. And I had enough sobriety to know that if I stayed in this situation, I could relapse and die. And I can't keep living like this. And he's not going to leave. He's shut off. He's checked out. I wasn't ready to leave the marriage. So I couch surfed for a while. And when that eventually became completely unmanageable, I mean, the stories of that chapter of my life are in my book, by the way, if you want more detail. It was total insanity. And finally, a sober girlfriend said, you need to get a place of your own. If you're not ready to leave your marriage and he's not ready to be forthcoming about telling you what's happening or going to therapy and doing the work, you got to get a place that you can rest your head. You have to have a sanctuary. This is not a way to live a sober life. So that's what I did. I signed a lease. I was terrified. I was 30 years old. I had never really lived alone. I went away to college for a little bit, had a roommate in college. And almost as soon as I went back to New York City, also had a roommate in New York City, and him and I moved in together. So I'm 30 years old. I'm married. I have no idea how to be with myself. I have no idea what my favorite color is. Even when I look back at us getting married, he planned the whole thing. I'm such a control freak, but I had my tail between my legs. I let him do everything. What color flowers do you want, Samantha? I don't know, purple? I could give a fuck about the color purple, right? And I can tell you that now, but I got in that apartment It was unfurnished. I had a mattress. I collapsed on the mattress, and I looked up at the ceiling, and I just thought, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do? And the right person in the program, the 12-step program, stepped into my life at the right time. And she said, what if we did the steps around your marriage? Because you're not trying to go out, at least right now, and find cocaine, but you're miserable. So what if we make them apply to the situation you're navigating? And so we did. And, what does that mean? What does that look like? And by the way, I've done this again and again and again. And so when people talk about emotional sobriety in the context of having the 12 steps as tools in their spiritual toolkit, they are talking about using the steps in a practical way around the life circumstance that they're in. But it hadn't been done for me, to me, with me up until this point, right? So it was like an act of revolution. So I'm powerless over my marriage. I'm powerless over his resentment towards everything I did, that we moved too quickly to get married and we didn't heal first, about him constantly rejecting me, about me trying to change his mind and being unable to. The list went on and on. And when I tried to exert power over this man and what he thinks of me, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. I have absolutely no peace. I have no access to real power, the kind of power that comes from inside of you. I have no sense of worthiness. And that's what we did, step after step after step. And then we got to the 9th step, which is making an amends. And I don't know if anyone listening can relate to this, but I'm a hardwired perfectionist. And when you are type A to the extreme, what can happen is you can become the most culturally productive and spiritually bankrupt human on earth, because perfectionism collapses with matters of the heart. Believe me, I tried. So when we got to the 9th step and this sponsor said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? It was foreign. The idea that a professional self-lacerator could forgive herself for the things she had done, that they were not a stamp on who she was as a person. They were a moment in time that I could now make a living amends toward and free myself from the shackles of that shame. It was unbelievable to me that at 30 years old, that was the first time I had even considered it, that anyone had even brought it to my attention. And I had been in therapy. I had been sober for 5 years. This time in my life, when I dropped onto that mattress in that apartment, that was spiritual rock bottom. Working with that woman was the beginning of returning home to my capital S self, right? So as I'm chipping away at my shame by doing the step work in this way, I start to hear the whisper of my intuition. And it startled me at first. I remember thinking, how the fuck am I going to fall asleep? My whole life, somebody else had been soothing me to sleep. Somebody or something, a drug, a drink, my mother when I was little stroking my hair, my boyfriend, now husband, stroking my head until my eyes rolled back. And now I was alone. And so my intuition said, you're going to have to wrap your arms around yourself. What? I mean, I had been running very cerebrally, as intelligent type A people often do, the brain just going 10,000 miles a minute, running our lives. But when I got quiet enough and there was no shame through which I was seeing my life and what I thought I deserved, when I was seeing things for the way they were, which was, fuck, I'm in a marriage I don't even want to be in. I'm not being treated the way I want to be treated or the way I deserved, no matter what I did. What is it that I actually want for my life? All of a sudden, the shame that was stifling my intuitive voice cleared, and I could hear her again. And so 8 or 9 months in that apartment away from my husband, and I started to get to know her. And that's who I now call God. So I had to come all the way up against my programmed beliefs about God that were there and firmly held on to for good reason. I wasn't being a self-centered addict, which is what they say in recovery. You're in your ego, you're self-centered. It's so much deeper than that. We become really selfish. We do really terrible things to ourselves and to others. That is true. But we are not bad people. And it is not just our ego that we're operating from. We are operating from deeply ingrained beliefs and patterns that we needed when we were young, that now in adulthood are hurting us and other people. I had to try them again and again and again. And I believe because so many people don't make it, that the only reason I didn't relapse and die in those 5 years of misery is because my sponsor killed himself. And I didn't want to die. And I knew that it was my fate if I touched it. But I did not know how to live any other way. And that was 10 years ago. That was when my whole life changed. And there's so much more to talk about in regards to the career path that I went down and the one that I'm on now, where I have a book coming out. But that's the beginning of where my life started.
And at what point did the source that was preventing you from going back to that addiction, at what point did that go from the fear or desire to just not die to the successes in the compound of enough time sober and your own successes, the own life you built, saying, you know what, no, I prefer this life. I don't want to lose this life. At what point did the thing keeping you away from the addiction switch from the fear of death to the keeping the life you had?
Every time I listened to my intuition and trusted it and then followed through on whatever she was guiding me to do, and I had a little win, I was getting armed with proof that, oh, it's not that I just don't want to die, but maybe this thing called living could be really cool too. I found out my husband was having an extramarital affair for 5 years on and off. I had big plans to divorce his ass and run around town and start a new life. And I did for a little bit. I separated again, went crazy like an animal coming out of captivity. And then my intuition after about a year said, "Are you sure you're done?" And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me right now? Are you actually going to make me consider?" This is like my brainy brain, right? My ego brain, my perfectionist brain, the brain that was taught, you don't fucking take a man back who does that to you. What kind of woman does that? Is speaking to my intuition. And what my intuition knew was that I could look at what happened and be done. I fought a good fight. So she was not punishing me or judging me. She was like, "If you're done, girl, let's go. Let's go start a new life. But if you're not done, you might have to stay and fight. If it's possible that you and your husband really, really love each other, that you were so young, and it was the perfect combination of an untreated codependent and an untreated addict, and there's no sort of chronic cheating happening. There's no real belief except that it was just so messy, and that perhaps on the other side of the mess, you two could have a really happy life. You might need to stay. You might need to stay. And so if we fast forward, I did stay, and it was a lot of work, but I'm still married to him and we have 2 kids, right? When we got back together and we did the healing work, because what that looked like was I would get triggered about something seemingly small, the dishes in the sink, but I'd have a reaction at level 10. And I had enough recovery to go, wait a second. If it's hysterical, it's historical. What's happening right now? And really, it was some kind of PTSD experience where the way he dismissed my feeling in that moment felt exactly like the 2 years of me going, I know you're cheating on me. Just tell me the truth. And he went, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not the cheater, you are. Right? And I would have to reflect, tell him that I got triggered, and he would meet me where I was, and I would cry, and he would hold me, and we would move to the other side of that moment. And I kept having these experiences where, as I trusted my intuitive voice again and again, then it was motherhood and miscarriages and wanting to control when and how I was going to be pregnant. Boy, that's not up to me. And having to surrender. And eventually meeting my perfect baby through hell and high water. Another win. Damn, this life might be worth living after all. It might be so much bigger and so much more beautiful than I could ever, ever, ever imagine. Right? So I have a laundry list of sober lived experiences. And we might need to get to the most recent thing that happened that really dovetailed into the career pivot I made, because this whole time, as I was in the marital crisis and then found everything out, thought I was leaving him and reconciled, I was building a business first out of total desperation, because I was like, well, I don't have his financial support. I don't have any kind of support. And as a doctor working for someone else in a clinic, making $33 an hour when you have $100,000 of debt, that's not going to cut it. So I started to get really crafty and go, what's happening in this healthcare landscape? Because there are so many needs that are not being met. How can I fill that gap? So my entrepreneurial spirit got kicked into gear out of fear, really, of my actual life circumstance. And eventually I opened a clinic that bridged the gap between insurance going, you're good enough. You're doing straight leg raises with your PT. You really want to be running. You only have a little bit of pain. You're like 60, 70% better. You're good. We're discharging you. And I was like, well, I want to make people 100% better. I have a doctorate. So where are these people going if they're not going to us? And it seemed insane to me that they were paying trainers and Pilates instructors, yoga teachers, all the money, and we were making nothing. And we were just chasing down symptoms instead of treating the source. So I had this business, and for 10 years, as I got back with my husband, as I had babies, I had a private practice in Santa Monica, a cash-based clinic where it was whole body, whole person. And deeply rewarding, deeply fulfilling. And of course, the people coming in to see me, these are not typically addicts in recovery. These were normal people. These were wealthy people, high functioning athletes who were about to retire, but their bodies were hurting, and yet they too were struggling with what I call soul sickness. They paid all the money in the world to come see me. Their pain wasn't gone. They were willing. Fine, I'm going out of network. I will do what you say. Then I'm giving them this curated template for exactly what to do. I'm giving them what they need to practice to change their life. Because without practice, we can't make new neural pathways for change, right? It'll only be temporary. And one after another, they'd come back and there'd be some kind of excuse. It's not my money, it's their money, right? I had this deadline and I had to stay up till 3 a.m. I was so tired, I couldn't do the program. I'm exhausted today. Addicted to productivity,
Mm.
addicted, addicted to thinness. I can't lift those weights. I'll get too big. Addicted to martyrdom. Whatever it was, there was this other thing happening that I could touch a little because of my sober experience. And sometimes people heard me and I really affected change. And we got through the soul part of the problem and we could make their body better. But then on March 13th of 2022, I got a phone call that I had been dreading my entire life, which is that my sister died of a drug overdose. And everything came to a screeching halt. Everything about life as I knew it stopped. I knew a couple things in that moment. One, I was absolutely going to write a book. Wasn't sure what it was going to be about, but I knew that day that I was writing a book. And secondly, I could no longer be in spaces and places where I was just Samantha Harte, the clinician. Wherever I was going to go next, I had to bring all of me to the table. The woman who had traversed somebody's suicide, her own overdose, her husband's extramarital affair, miscarriages, the death of my father, which happened suddenly. We didn't even touch on that. And the doctor of physical therapy, and the mother, and the artist. I had to be an integrated version of who I had become and whoever I was about to become after that loss, wherever I went next. So for the last 2 years, I have turned away from my practice in large part. I subleased my space. I have some private clients, but mostly I've been head down writing this book and doing a lot of other things that are creative. The first thing I've ever loved as a kid was dancing and singing. I wanted to do it professionally. That was the greatest place of joy for me. And my mom wanted me to be as far away from that as possible because she never, ever had financial stability. And that was her teaching me, no one can take your degree from you. And getting a prestigious degree is a surefire way to a stable life. Ha, ha, ha. And then you graduate with $100,000 of debt and you're making $60,000 a year, right? So joke's on us. So I had this thing inside of me that, when I had my private clinic, I dabbled in it. There was some creativity and artistry in what I had done. I designed the space in a beautiful way. I had private dance clients. I did some yoga, but I was mostly a clinician. And so as I started writing my book, it was like whatever shackles were left around me, cultural shackles. You can start a podcast when? You can write a book when? When you have this many followers. When you are famous and people will care. Everything collapsed. And I was gifted with a very strong knowing that I could grant myself permission to do any and all of those things if I so chose. Because now there were 3 options in front of me. 1, relapse and die. Known that for a long time, don't want to do that. 2, numb out, which I did after my dad died. And that's too long of a story, but boy, did I try to run from that grief. I got into a pretty severe eating disorder well into my sobriety because I found the only thing I felt I could control and manipulate, which was food and body. Because the idea of the powerlessness of that grief and the way things ended between us was unbearable to me. And running from the grief, of course, you cannot outrun a beast like loss. So it found me. And in those 2 years, I didn't heal at all. And I didn't create anything. And if anything, I got closer to a relapse as opposed to farther away. And so option 3 was to fully fucking live, to go by the 24-hour a day metric of, does it bring me joy? And is it truthful? And for 2 years, every single day, I am looking for joy and honesty. And that could be this conversation. That could be with my kids and doing something totally childlike and irrelevant and playful. That could be a yoga class. It could be as small or as big. If I get both of those in the same day, sign me up. Best day ever.
Mm.
Everything got so clear in the wake of that loss. I've written a screenplay. My podcast is up and running. I have the book coming out on June 10th. I have met more people who are opening more doors for me than I could have ever imagined. I'm making music with high up people in the music industry. I went on tour as a choreographer last year to Japan for 2 weeks. I am a mom of 2. Who does that? I do that. I do that. And I'm showing other people what is possible. And it's crazy because when I started writing my book, I had no idea what it was going to be about other than I have to tell my story. I have to. If for no other reason, then I'm leaving it behind for my kids and their kids. But as I wrote and as I got clearer and I had mentors and then I got a publisher, I had a lot to learn about writing a book and the industry of writing a book. A good question was asked, which is, what are you trying to do? And the answer was, help as many people as I can. Well, okay. So what's the thing that helped you the most? Doing the 12 steps around the situation that I was in. Using the 12 steps in a modern and trauma-informed way. In every single situation, big or small. So that's what the structure of my book became. It's 12 chapters. Every chapter corresponds with a step. I start with the language as it is written in the traditional literature. I break through the fourth wall to the reader and say, I know, don't close the book. I hated it too. I get it. I tell stories of my life that capture what I learned about power as a young girl, because I learned it came from outside of me. I learned to self-abandon. I learned to take the emotional temperature of the room. No wonder I wasn't connected to my intuition. I learned that using drugs is normal. That's what people do. You had a hard day, pop a pill. I write it out. I drop the drawbridge between me and the reader by being really raw and vulnerable about my life story because I'm on the other side, for the most part, of the mess and I can speak to it. And then I revamp the steps in the chapter. So I have a call to action for the reader to do the work in a way that resonates with something in their life that's important to them, that they're struggling with, addict or not. So my book became a self-help memoir. And the more people I met over the 2 years as the book was becoming clear, the more people were like, this isn't a memoir. This is a movement. You're doing something much, much bigger than writing a book. And it's true. I am. I have somebody from Warner Brothers whose brother is struggling with active addiction. And when we met through a mutual friend, the armor that was around her from being in the role of fixer and saver in her family dynamic just shattered. And she started crying because she needs this help too, even though she's not the addict. And now she wants to make a documentary about it. You know, it's absolutely insane. And here's the best fucking part. Here's the best part. All of this stuff I'm talking about that's happened in 2 years is so cool. Do I believe in my bones I'm going to speak on stages? Am I creating events right now to speak on stages? You bet your fucking ass I am. I'm not waiting for someone to give me permission. I have 3 events coming up in June. You know what I'm doing? I'm speaking about my story. I'm doing a Q&A, and then I'm performing. I'm singing and dancing, and then I'm going to hang out with everybody because that's who I am. You want to know what's on my heart? You come to one of those events, and eventually someone will tap me on the shoulder and say, I need you to come and do whatever you're doing over here. And here's what I'm going to pay you. But even if all of it got taken away, everything, every outside thing, because I've lost so many things that matter to me, I'm still okay. I am the cycle breaker in my long lineage of ancestral dysfunction, mental illness, and addiction. I've already done the most important thing. My children, when I die, will have my book as a guidepost for how their mom got through her hardest things and how they can too. They will know the sound of my voice when I've spoken on podcasts, mine and yours and others. They will hear me sing as an expression of my joy and my sorrow. What else is there? And when I remember that, and I just go out into the world every day and try to help somebody else, my cup is full, even when I am grieving, which I am constantly doing because grief doesn't discriminate and it shows up when and how it wants to.
Mm. And I've got a question about one of the things you said, and it's personal, but also relevant to a lot of people listening here. I would think people that have empathized with your story so far. You mentioned joyfulness and truthfulness are the 2 things you lead your everyday with now. Have Do you notice those past neural connections of addiction being able to be swapped out for something new and more productive, like running your business, like doing things that are joyful, and almost like replacing the addiction with something that is more a better addictive thing? Maybe it's going to the gym or whatever it is. And then is there that line of, is it better to kill an addiction or replace it with something else? You know a lot more about addiction than me. I've got a personal experience with it, for me and my family. So that's why I'm curious how you kind of pick apart that pattern.
Mm. Yeah, it's a tough question because no one really knows the
Mm.
cause of addiction. There's a lot of research. The verdict is not yet out, right? And so, is it genetic? Are we just destined for that? Is it a product of childhood trauma? Is it a hardwired thing? What I know in my own experience is that it's a healthy combination of a genetic predisposition. And by the way, there's no research that says if you have a gene for something, this is anything, that is your fate. It is the environmental circumstances that either activate the gene or don't. And so, knowing that, I had a predisposition. And then my childhood circumstances, what I was exposed to, what I saw, set me off on a path combined with a very loud inner critic that made the pathways towards addictive behavior very, very strong. Very strong, right? So the reward centers where I was getting dopamine hits were really strong. So early recovery is really gross because you don't have strong reward centers in a healthy way yet. But as you stay sober and as you get those wins, as you discover sober joy metrics and things that give you that hit, if you will, that natural high, which by the way is our birthright to feel the good hormones and feel the good feelings. Those reward centers strengthen. So for me, there is definitely no white light, sudden rapid fire thing that has happened. It's been slow turning away from old behaviors that I kept trying, that kept making me feel like shit, and then going, let's try this other thing, and then discovering the other thing that made me feel good inside and revving that engine. So now it's not like I'm cured. I don't believe I can just trust and hope that I'm on autopilot now with the new healthier behaviors. Because when things were getting wired in my brain, the youngest, those pathways are still there. They're there. And they can show up at any time. Luckily now I know what they feel like in my body. So there's a physiologic feeling I now know. I get really stressed. I feel anxious. I have a pit in my stomach. I start ruminating and obsessing about the outcome. It kind of stinks, I know it. And I'm like, oof, you're doing that thing again that your nervous system is so comfortable doing. But you know that that doesn't end well. So how long do you want to keep doing this? And the really beautiful thing about time sober and time practicing new behavior is that your threshold for feeling those old patterns fire up is very low. You just start to go, oh, I'm not going to do this. Early on in recovery, I would stay in the pain and the struggle for so long before I went, fine, I'll try something else. Fine. Now I'm like, oop, you're about to do that thing. Are you sure you want to do that? You know how that ends. You know how that feels. And I very quickly can turn towards the new pathways and practice the stuff that I know makes me feel good. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And one interesting thing you said earlier was when you were running that clinic, you had, and hopefully the noise in the background is being canceled out. There's some construction here, but for the other kinds of addictions, I think you mentioned martyrdom and a few other things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does someone identify if they're addicted to something like that, which is not a conventional addiction, like a substance, sex, whatever it may be, right? How do you identify that addiction?
I think, you really have to be honest with yourself. You have to be so sick of the way you're living, where the idea of trying something new is less scary than going on the way you are. And that's the real tricky thing about change, right? If you're someone who's super high functioning, addicted to being busy, and you're getting a ton of accolades and you're highly productive, but you're starting to feel a little out of alignment. It's like your soul's kind of trying to whisper to you, like, I don't know about this life that we're doing right now. I don't know about this job. I don't know about this thing. It's just, I feel kind of icky. But what you're getting out of the productivity is still really working for you. You're not going to know or be zapped out of that pattern, right? So there's something that has to happen, enough pain about the way you're living. And I'm talking just constant anxiety, right? Insomnia. You're snapping at everybody you love. You have rage inside of you. You're constantly just pissed off. There are signs, right, that you're not happy. That has to get so pronounced that you get what I call zapped out of your subconscious operating pattern. Because we do it and we do it and we do it, even when it's not working, because we learned it. We were rewarded for it. And it becomes subconscious until the pain is so loud that your conscious mind goes, stop. You have to stop. That's the moment of reckoning. That's the precipice of change. It doesn't mean it's going to change. But then when your conscious mind starts to go, I don't know about this anymore, you have to be so done living out those patterns that no matter how scared you are to try something new, to re-examine how you're living, the job you have, the person and partner you're romantically engaged with, the friendship you're in that isn't really working, you have to be so sick of how you're living that you go, I don't know what I have to do, but it cannot be this anymore. And I'm going to jump and try, which is why the next really hard part is, what the hell do you do then? What's the thing that you do to change? If we have to practice something, what is it? That's why I think the 12 steps being this universally applicable toolkit is so valuable. There is literally a step from 1 to 12 in that order that if the language were finessed to match your circumstances, you could just follow. And you will have a brand new experience in your life, in your relationships, and how you speak to yourself. Yeah.
Interesting. And for your book launch, a small change of subject, which is really the same subject because everything we talked about is the content of part of your book. How are you going about launching your book as the author you are now?
Yeah. So I have a publicist, and that has definitely been important. I know not everybody can afford that. And thank God there are ranges of that, a couple $100, just at least to start getting you to go to events and getting you into some publications, just to gain some authority in media and press. So that's been really helpful on that side in terms of gaining credibility, right? And starting to hint and now really declare, she's got a book coming out. It's on this day. It's about this topic. And then getting on social media wherever I can and sharing, whether it's reading a paragraph from my book, talking about it on my podcast, which is called The Truth About Addiction, speaking about it when I meet somebody who wants to know what I do. And the thing that I touched on earlier, which is, again, a fearlessness that I have that was very unfortunately given to me as a result of the tragedies I have traversed. So I am not afraid to make an event where I get to talk about my book. There is nothing scarier than losing somebody you love. I am not scared to get on a stage and talk about my story if it means helping someone else. That shit excites me. So there's a combination of having the right people in my corner, you know, who really are backing this mission, networking, helping other people, providing value to other people, one-on-one connections, podcasting, guest appearancing on other people's podcasts like this. Anywhere that I can share this message, I am sharing it. If there is an event I can go to, I'm going to go to it. And if there's an event I can create, I'm going to create it. So I'm doing any and all things that I possibly can.
Do you notice, and I'm really curious to hear your answer to this question, do you notice that because what you recovered from and what you help other people recover from are such powerful pains that they're going through, whether it be addiction, loss, a challenge that is very significant, like the death of a parent, like you mentioned, that they're going through, and you kind of provide them the out, the escape, the recovery, the path forward. Do you think that they connect so well with your message, whether it be on social media, they're dumping out their soul in Instagram comments or whatever it is, because they're like, oh my gosh, she gets it. Nobody's nobody has talked about this, and she understands my pain. I thought I was alone. And it's such an intense pain a lot of people have, but there's a lot of stigma around an addiction like the one you're talking about. And so maybe there's a lot of embarrassment of, oh, I don't want to talk about that addiction I had so and so when whatever it was. She gets it. Do you think that because you're connecting to something so powerful with your audience, they become, as Pat Flynn calls it, super fans because you get it and because you share that experience?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I have a tattoo on my back that says vulnerability is my superpower. It wasn't always. I used to overshare with people who didn't earn the right to hear it. Brene Brown calls that hot wiring intimacy. But now, and I don't believe any of us fully heal. We are on a healing journey through the course of our lives, right? We don't graduate from our spiritual curriculum. But when I share now, what I'm really trying to do is shrink the shame that I know other people on the other side of the screen are feeling. If I had to reduce down the one thing that I think killed my sister, that killed Bobby, the man who sponsored and saved my life, it would be shame. So when I share about my hardest things and how I got to the other side, at the very core of what I'm trying to do is say, you might have done really bad things. I did too. But you are not a bad person. And I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of myself. And this is what I've overcome. Now watch how I live anyway. Watch what I'm doing with it. So yeah, I do. And I think, you want to talk about TED Talks. I've been applying like a crazy person to TED Talks, right? And the way that I'm starting that whole pitch is we all know someone who's suffering from anxiety, depression, or addiction. Every one of us. And we've got this wildly digitalized landscape that we're navigating, right? More globally connected than ever, and yet more spiritually disconnected from ourselves and each other, arguably than ever before. So, in the sea of social media posts that are highly curated and filtered, that show everything but the messy middle, you better fucking believe I'm going to come on there and say something important and something real and something true, because I don't know what I'm doing here if I don't do that. I don't know what I'm doing here. It doesn't always have to be, a needle to the heart, right? Sometimes what I share about is something so fucking joyful. A post I did 2 days ago was just a bunch of shots of me hysterically laughing, because that's part of how I live. For me, grief is so present. I have a mentally ill mom right now as we speak who will not take her meds, who got kicked out of the living facility that I got her into, who's living in a Motel 6. I am fucking devastated every single day that is how it looks with my only remaining family member. So I go get joy like the air that I fucking breathe. That's how important it is. So I'm either posting about the joy that is my birthright to give people permission to go get theirs, or I am posting what is on my heart, because maybe it will save somebody's life.
And where can we find you on the internet to follow you, connect with you, get more of what you're talking about?
All of my channels are at Dr. Samantha Harte, Dr. Samantha Harte. Harte is Harte, just a random silent E to confuse everybody. But yeah, I mean, you can find me all over the place. I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Awesome. One last question. If there's one piece of advice that you have for the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the entrepreneur that's speaking to grow their business, what would that be?
Get to know your intuitive voice if you don't already, and nurture and love on that relationship so much that it becomes your internal compass for absolutely everything that you do, personally and professionally. And you will be all right.
That hits. Well, Dr. Samantha, we'll wrap it up here. We went a little bit over here, but I thank you for spending the extra time sharing your message here, and hopefully everyone here that's listening right now can share it with a friend that needs to hear it and really connects or will connect with what Samantha was saying here. Thank you guys for listening, and Samantha, thank you for making the time to do this. Cheers, y'all.
Thank you so much. Bye.